and it's just gonna just pardon me a moment while like it boots up.
Our fifth community conversation in the times of coronavirus, and this conversation is going to focus on the LGBTQ community and all things that our loved ones are containing with, and more importantly, solution-based. So what are we going to do about it? So join us. I'm about to go live.
We are live.
We are live. Okay. All right. So welcome everyone.
Right.
Good evening. Really looking forward to having an amazing conversation today. My name is Julia Mejia. I'm a city councilor at large here in the city of Boston, and this is our fifth community conversation, really focusing on the issues that are impacting our community across the entire city as it relates to the coronavirus. And today I'm really excited to be joined by my sister in service, Councilor Breadon, who's gonna be as part of our panel. And in the spirit of stepping to the side and allowing others to lead, this conversation is going to be moderated by my Director of Policy, Jacob, who will be introducing himself and leading us through an introduction. I wanted to thank everyone for participating in this very important conversation and looking forward to a robust dialogue. And I'm going to kick it over to Jacob so that he can do his thing.
Thank you, Councilor. Again, I just want to thank everyone for taking part of this conversation. You've heard me say it before, but like this is something that needs to be happening on a national level, and it starts with communities like ours standing up, talking about what we can do on a local level, and most importantly, leading with a solutions-oriented conversation, which is something that I hope we'll be having here today. I want to just go around and sort of have everyone introduce themselves. So if you could just say your name, your pronouns, what you do, and if you could only eat one thing for the rest of your life, what would it be? So I will start. My name is Jacob. I am the Director of Public Policy for Councilor Julia Mejia. My pronouns are he, him, his, or they, them. And if I could only eat one thing for the rest of my life, around the corner from me, there is a little shop called Dumpling Kingdom, which prepares pickled cucumbers that are my life source during these troubled times. So I would be eating those for the rest of my days. I wanted to pass it off to Kirby.
Hello, my name is Kirby Fully Loaded, and I am a Boston-based drag performer. I'm also a social worker during the day. My pronouns are she, hers, or they, them. And if I could eat one thing, it would be guacamole that I make myself.
Good answer. Very good answer. I'll pass it over to Amir.
Hey y'all, my name is Amir Dixon. My pronouns are he and his. I'm the creative director and founder of ANI. We are a creative impact firm for social impact. And again, thank y'all for having me. If I could eat one thing, so my brother Kamar, who's also on the call, makes amazing fried chicken, barbecue chicken. So it would be chicken and he would have to make it. So wherever we're like stranded at, he would have to be stranded with me. So I would definitely say it would be an array of something in that area.
I love it. And with that, we'll pass it over to Kamar.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kamar Porter. I work for, my pronouns are he, him, and his, Boston Glass, and GRI Health. I'm the prevention network, I'm the prevention network. And if I could pick one thing, actually also be chicken, so, and there you
And Kamar, you would have to.
I mean, it's so versatile. I mean, it's a great answer. I'll pass it off to Brady, our scheduler.
Hi, yes, my name is Brady Baca. My pronouns are he, him, his. I also work in Councilor Mejia's office as our scheduler. And if I could only have one food to eat for the rest of my life, it absolutely would be chicken lo mein. It's like my favorite it's my favorite food, and like I could literally eat it at every meal.
I love it. When we're done with this, we're all going to go out for varieties of chicken.
Yes.
I'll pass it over to Sammy.
Hi everyone, my name is Sammy. I am one half of the collaborators of Full Bush Productions, which is a very grassroots, community-based drag and queer gender expression performance collaborative. My partner in crime over there is Anastasia Papanoff. And during the day, I am a therapist and I work with kids and families in the city of Boston through a program called CBHI. And I am also the curator of the largest collection of oral histories of young adults raised in queer families in the 80s and 90s. And if I could eat one thing for the rest of my life, or one thing I couldn't give up, I've been making these like lemon curd desserts that are just so good. And they keep well in the fridge. So what more do you want?
Please send me the recipe. And did we get your pronouns?
Oh, thank you. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, but I'm flex.
Thank you. And then Councilor Breadon, if you wanted to go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Breadon, Councilor for Alston Brighton, District 9. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Let's see if I could, that lemon curd thing, I make wicked good lemon curd. So I'd love to do a swap scene sometime with your lemon curd. If I could eat only one thing, I'd say, let's see. Oh, this is a tough one. Fuji apples. Fuji apples. I love Fuji apples.
I'm a Honeycrisp girl myself, but I'll accept Fuji as a backup. And then last but not least, Councilor Mejia.
Oh, I go again. Okay, Councilor Mejia, it's the She series, and if I can eat one thing for the rest of my life, it would have to be rice and beans.
Oh, now you're talking.
Yes.
Thank you. So I appreciate everyone taking the time to introduce themselves. I wanted to get off right away. I know one of the questions that wasn't initially on our packet, but one that really needs to be raised is the issue of housing. Right now, I mean, in the city of Boston and all throughout the Commonwealth, housing was an issue before COVID-19. And what we're learning is that the circumstances around the COVID-19 outbreak have really exacerbated what is already a really difficult situation. So I'd love to hear from people about what have they been hearing in the community about struggles finding affordable housing, and more importantly, what can be done about it. And I wanted to throw that off to Sammy first, because I know that was one of your questions.
Sure, thank you. I think I'll try and answer this in a queer focused way because of the content of our meeting. I think one of the biggest things for me is thinking about queer youth and where they're living safely right now. Big concern about homelessness, and also concerned about queer youth who are stably housed, but in families that are violent or oppressive towards them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a huge, huge, huge one for me. And then trans and gender nonconforming youth, where they're finding safety. Boston is an incredible place to be if you're a queer and gender nonconforming youth, but just still so many barriers to accessing safe housing all across the spectrum. And also in terms of being able to stay in your housing and who you're living with. I think queers in general, we make very creative families, and thus we make very creative living situations. And so are we living with partners? Are we living in big cooperative houses where there's already 15 people living? And how are we negotiating our own house rules about who gets to come in, who doesn't, what jobs are people working? Like all of those things that come up with housing feel very queer to me because of the nature of kind of non-traditional queer life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think especially something that's been on my mind recently is the census and the new rules that have been allowed to sort of accommodate for relationships and living situations that have previously not been accounted for. And I think sort of raising that issue of housing is especially prescient now. And I wanted to throw it out that question to any of the social workers or any of the community activists. I know Kirby, you're in the social work field. I was wondering a little bit if that has come up in your work at all.
Definitely. I don't work with queer youth. I mean, I have queer youth on my caseload, but that's primarily I work with juvenile justice involved youth who are also really struggling with housing and placement. So I've definitely noticed of my queer clients struggling to stay at home and then also facing like not necessarily punishment, but backlash for like, well, why don't you want to stay at home? That's what you're supposed to be doing. And then also fearing getting sick or spreading that to their loved ones too. So it's definitely coming up a lot.
Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. Please, yeah.
I apologize. If I could just add in there. So my first thing is, what is affordable housing in Boston? Is there such thing as affordable housing in Boston? For me, what I'm finding a lot of, especially in the work that I'm in the community that I come from, queer, trans, and people of color, right? A lot of folks were unstably housed prior, and now it is just literally compounded and made an issue worse. For me, what my push on that is for a city and a state that owns so much of the land and property in the city, we should not be having issues around housing and having people on the street. With many churches that are boarded up and the doors are closed, I believe we have the resources there, and I think that we have the tools to start looking at addressing housing. But I think it's about how do we take the initiative to make it happen, right? Because when students were out of school, all of a sudden we found a ton of computers to give students, right? When teachers didn't have money for supplies, right? So I know, and we all know that the resources are there. I think it's gonna take an effort for us to say to our city councilors, to our state reps, to our governor, and to our mayor, to really open up the doors. The city owns all the property, right? And I think that we have an opportunity to really address the housing crisis if we really, are just intentional about it and make it happen.
I really appreciate that. Did anyone else have any remarks on the issue of housing in Boston?
Yeah, I definitely do. So some of the things that you asked were, what are people experiencing? And especially people, for someone who specifically works with youth, I definitely know like there are a lot of things issues that are going on with housing specifically for especially trans youth, being misgendered at home, being like the issue of suicidal thoughts coming up, like another thing that comes into mental about, and there's like a lot of issues that are like kind of like a crisis mode, but they're stuck in the house, which is really, really, really hard. And I want us to like probably try and delve on like maybe some kind of like things that we can talk about to address this issue, or maybe address some of the issues while we have people that are in this crisis like now needing help with like just people to check in with them and like mental health stability and stuff like that.
I agree.
Because that is all connected. I believe that's all our situations, and like our stability at home is definitely a mental connection there, and making sure that we're okay. So
Yeah, go ahead, Councilor.
I don't want to interrupt your flow, Jacob, but I just wanted to just lend some voice to this particular point around the mental wellness check. So on Thursday, we're going to be hosting from our office on a weekly basis mental health checks for young people in particular, because we have a lot of kids who are feeling isolated and disconnected, but they don't really have an outlet. And so we are working with clinicians who are going to be hosting these mental health checks alongside our youth liaison. So it's going to be co-led by a youth and also mental health clinicians. on a weekly basis, so that young people can have a place that they can start calling their own. And so if you can refer young people to participate in that conversation on Thursday, that would be great. The way that we envision it is that we're starting off in one place, and kids can ask questions. They can, it's a comfortable space. I don't call a space safe, because that is too much to assume that, but at least a comfortable space for young people to be able to talk and get real about the things that they're experiencing. But the goal is to then be able to break out into smaller sessions, like breakout rooms, to unpack things in a smaller setting with their peers. And so that is the ultimate goal of how these mental health check-ins for young people will roll out. But I agree, mental health and issues that are going unchecked and untreated because our teachers are not in front of our kids. We don't know what's happening at home. And sometimes kids don't have friends that they can call on to be real about the abuse that they're probably experiencing at home. That's real too. And there are a lot of young people who haven't even come out, and now are at home, and feeling, the emotional trauma that comes with not being able to be your full authentic self, right? If the only place where they felt safe was at school and they don't have that outlet, what does that look like for a lot of our kids, So I just want to uplift that too as something else as we carry this conversation.
And I'll put it out there too. I work for CBHI and JRI Health Pay. We're all still taking referrals too. So if you feel like, oh, this isn't a good time for me to start with like therapeutic services because it's, what are they going to do? We're working as hard as we can to like make virtual services accessible to people and still feel helpful. So at least you have a person that you can call if things are starting to get tough. I think Glass is doing the same thing too.
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
That's really great. And I think it's sort of a great opportunity to talk about the sudden loss of queer spaces, particularly for youths that are sober, that are comfortable for people. I wasn't out in high school, but I knew that then I had the opportunity to go to the GSA. I know in college I had the opportunity to go to the Queer Society, and those were resources that I had available because they were physical spaces for me. But I would love to hear from our resident youth, Brady, about what has it been like to sort of have that space be lost? Is that a tangible feeling, and what is being done to sort of make up for that?
Yeah, certainly. I'm happy just to talk about my experience with that at least. So in regards to, this whole crisis and how that's been impacting me as a queer youth, I think that before this, I was at Emerson College, and even without the restrictions that COVID-19 has placed upon us as a community, there were still challenges, trying to navigate spaces, because as someone who's under 21, there aren't a lot of queer spaces necessarily available to the youth. Sure, we had our school's GSA, and there are spaces in Boston, but they're not necessarily readily available or accessible, or people don't necessarily know about them. So I think that's definitely a challenge. And when you take the ability to go out and be in community away from folks, I think that's certainly something that can be incredibly difficult. I know for me, it certainly, these past month has been draining on my own mental and emotional health. I had to move back to Texas, which is very different from Boston. And that's been something I've been having to navigate. I think if I can find an upside, it's not all doom and gloom. I think that queer youth or folks in my generation at least have really made, even before this crisis, we're making a lot of use of digital spaces and online spaces as means to meet and find community and find that comfortable space. So it's my sort of, not necessarily belief, but rather more hope that folks who may not have the tools necessary to find the relief or resources that they need right now will at least be able to sort of rely on that. But then that gets into the whole discussion and sort of intersects with class. Who has access to these digital spaces, who has access to the internet and online resources, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we're really seeing a lot of exacerbation of a lot of issues with social isolation from a youth perspective.
I definitely feel that. Even like I'm just out of college now, and it's something that I've been experiencing is just sort of that isolation, the lack of spaces. I did want to give an opportunity for Councilor Breadon to chime in on this. We had a hearing today on mental health, domestic violence, social isolation, all things that are being experienced by a lot of people, but I would say very acutely by the queer community. So I'm wondering, Councilor, if you could sort of give us your thoughts on that and how to apply sort of a queer lens to it.
Thank you, Jacob. I really felt the timing of the hearing was very timely. There's so many folks, no matter what their
Is
background,
anyone
the
else
one
having a hard
being
time?
actively encouraged to isolate. And for some folks, they can isolate in their own homes and it's safe and they've got a supportive partner or their family. But for others, so many of those spaces are not safe. And I think for queer youth, it's particularly difficult. For young people who are maybe not out, but they're cut off from their peers, and they're I have to decline this, cut off from their peers and their support net anyways, because there's a lot of comfort in being able to go out and meet your peers outside your home and in the community, and that's part of that's part of your coming out transition independent life as a queer person. And generally with Gay Straight Alliance and all those that you get in a school setting or a queer club at college, all those supports have been swept away. The other issue that's of concern to me is we talked a little about on the hearing, we talked a little about isolation with elders, and I think the elder LGBT community came of age and when it was not socially acceptable to be queer. They had to hide their identity very often. They struggled for many years to come out, and now in this modern time it's okay, but I think the fact of being pushed back into your home again and disconnected from your regular social networks has been very traumatic, and I think there's going to be some long-term consequences. I think we'll have a lot of work to do to bolster people and after this is all over. Thank you.
Can I add? Oh, sorry, Jacob.
No, please go ahead. I love this.
Something that I want to lift up about the queer elder piece is also a lot of queer elders have experienced just a lifetime of systemic discrimination, which leads to a lifetime's worth of economic inequity, and now being faced with housing instability, food instability, meal instability, and also a lot of queer elders of this particular generation who are now in their late 70s, 80s, didn't have kids or had kids and they were taken away by the courts. And so they're left without a lot of social support networks. And also not to mention that so many queer people died. So many people who are now queer elders lost their friends already in a pandemic. And so just support networks have been eroded over the lifetimes of our queer elders. And so there's all of these issues that we're facing, plus also some mistrust, some I think very valid mistrust of the mental health system, of the medical system that has classified our queer elders as insane and pathologized. So there's just so much stacked up there. And also as a queer community, I want to call us out that I don't think we have good systems for having intergenerational love and care and support, right? We have these very monogenerational social networks that are focused around sex, at least in ways like in visible ways where to find them. Like we have clubs, we have nights out at bars, we have whatever. Like, what if you're sober? What if you're kind of quiet? What if you read? You know, what if you want to make intergenerational queer connection? And we don't really have that in our community as a system set up before this. So when something like this happens, it erodes even further.
Yeah, I really agree with all of that. I feel at this moment, I think when we go through this experience, I think we're going to, I hope that we're going to reset our compass and trying to adjust for these systemic inequities, but also to address some of the injustices of how we've treated our LGBT community in the past. And also, I'd love to see something coming out of this is more of intergenerational solidarity across the board, but particularly in the queer community. That's it.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilor.
Okay, I want to respect the rules of engagement here. You are the facilitator, and so I'm loving this conversation, and I think that's exactly dead on in terms of the how we move pre and post COVID-19. These conversations have been happening in our communities, right? But I think what COVID-19 has done, and based on all of the conversations that we have thus far, is has magnified it, right? And has pushed it to the point where we can no longer ignore it, right? And I think it's really about how do we move forward and recognizing that I'm not interested in going back to normal. Back to normal never worked for any of us. It's really about how are we going to move forward and how are we going to take the lessons that we've learned throughout this process and make sure that we have the political and the moral will to continue to move beyond this. It's not just how we're addressing it, but like how are we building the infrastructure for long-term community building? And I think that the intergenerational piece is key in that process. And I also think that we have an opportunity to really look at this from a cross-cultural perspective too. I think that there is an intersection there that oftentimes gets missed out of the conversation, is that we need to bring in people from across different ethnicities together and orientation, you know, and like, and have a holistic conversation that includes everybody in this dialogue so that it's not just us working in our own little silos around this issue, so that it's intergenerational, and it's also multicultural, and it's also multidimensional, so that we are really creating the type of community and environment for our kids. I say our kids because they're the future generation, but if we can build this in a way that is sustainable, then then it's like building the world that we all have wanted for ourselves for far too long. What opportunities exist for us to be able to do that in these times is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, if I can add to that as well, my immediate thought in hearing what everyone's saying is, honestly, we really need a queering of the resistance of the movement. You know, queer and trans, Black and brown folks have taught us like anything that we need, any change that we need, it's not going to be given to us, you know? And I think that we, as a community, right, to be able to have that intergenerational conversation across gender, age, race, I think we have to create space where we can come together and create our own demands, right? Because like Sammy was saying around the number of senior LGBTQ folks that are dealing with housing and isolation, we can say that and talk about that with the data and in retrospect, but right now I can think of 5 people off the top of my head that I know they're dealing with this, you know? So I think we have to do the work of not asking for what we want, but demanding that, right? So to go back to what I was saying earlier about the housing situation, around the mental health situation, we own the property, we own the land, and we can solve the issue, right? That's number one, but I think we have to really organize and really start from the bottom up. where are and who are the people most at need, they should not be living on the street. Right now, we have people who are going to put themselves at risk for HIV, STIs because they need to eat tonight, right? And in order for them to eat tonight, they need to have sex with that person, that John, and get that coin and put themselves at risk. And I think my grandmother always says, it's not about what you do, it's about what you don't do when you know you should do it, right? And I think this is that opportunity not to go back to normal and to really stake the claim. You know, and I don't want to sound like, you know, I'm just talking shit, but really, excuse my language, sorry. But really like getting serious about it, we have to come to the table. At the end of the day, again, the city, the state owns the land. The city, the Department of Public Health makes the rules and the regulations around accessing to different mental health services and et cetera. At the end of the day, we have to break down the barriers and open up the access so people can access it. You know, and I think that it is going to require a high level of action and really queering up the resistance and queering up the movement, you know, because for our senior citizens who are, you know, don't have nowhere to live and they don't get food stamps and they are not getting access to services. I'm thinking about, you know, trans kids and how they need the support and help. And I think that until we really get serious about what we want and not ask for, we are going to come back to this situation, right? Because like the counselor said, with the COVID-19, the Band-Aid gets ripped off, right? The federal government just shelled out $2 trillion, and how many of us got a coin, right? How many of us now are without a job, don't have something to eat, you know? And if we know this, how can we disrupt the system that continues to fail us? And I think like when saying at the table, we have to get clear about demands and we have to hold our elected officials accountable, because not the folks on this call, but I'm just saying in general, the high level, the failure in leadership to really address issues, something has to get done, you know? I thank God that I'm able to pay my rent, but I think about the kids who can't, the folks who cannot put 2 pennies together, you know, and what happens to them when this is all over and the $2 trillion now becomes $4 trillion and we ain't got nothing, you know? So I think we have to go to the State House, go to City Hall. We have to really stake our claim in the dirt and really say, hey, listen, this is what we want and this is what we need, and we're not leaving until we get it, you know? I know that it's going to take a level of organizing. It's going to take a level of us showing up at the table, but I definitely don't think that we should come from a place of approaching power, you know, nicely, right? We should approach power respectively, but authoritatively.
Snaps all around. I'm hearing so much about like the need for accountability, both from, you know, our elected officials, but also inside the community as well, which I feel is so strong, is leading by example. Like I'm seeing so many people on a variety of apps being like, let's quarantine and chill. It's like, no, honey, like that's so dangerous right now. And sort of putting out that voice and being a strong leader in that space is very difficult when sort of social community is such a heavy emphasis. But finding other ways and outlets for you to sort of live and thrive in your own spaces, I think is so important, which is why I'm really thrilled that we have a lot of artists here. I would love to hear a little bit either from Sammy or from Kirby or from both ideally about how your art has sort of changed in this new space, what you've learned about yourself, what you've learned about your art, and how you're sort of like being able to produce in this time. From either one of you.
I can go.
Please.
Yeah, I think there's been this really cool like drag renaissance internationally, honestly, of stepping into like a digital virtual platform and like using your art, because drag is art and drag is an expression of creativity and love, but it's also such a community building platform as well. I mean, like sure, I love every aspect of drag, and an aspect I love almost the most is the gathering together and it is a lot of like bars and parties and things like that, but there's so much like richness and community there. So a lot of really talented folks have like learned how to bring that art and still create that sense of community in a virtual platform. I don't know if you can see behind me. I got a green screen and some nice lighting set up behind me that my lovely partner helps me figure out. But it's a lot of like learning and things you didn't think you had time to do before, or maybe you couldn't do or wouldn't be good at. You're sort of, I feel like a lot of people, myself included, are like taking on so that we're still able to like share what we have to give the world and our fellow community members. And just like continue, there's a lot of elements and aspects of drag that I think people maybe don't think about, like we create our own costumes, we make our own wigs, we create our own digital content, so it's just like a lot of exploration and really delving more into like those creative things. That being said, that is not also possible for everyone. Like I said, I'm really fortunate to have that and access to internet and things like that. But also I think it's been definitely a time of exploration and creativity, and just trying to figure out how to do like the best we can with what we've got. There's some really great stuff out there that folks are doing.
Go ahead, Councilor.
I have a question, Kirby, and you could tell me, like when I hear you, I define all the different elements that go into producing a show. Just wondering what opportunities, if any, exist for career explorations for young people to see this art form, to see the production of this work as viable ways for them to be able to make an income. I'm just curious as to whether or not that's ever been explored, and if not, it should be, because I think that in and itself is such a great way for young people to see all the ways that they can actually make a living out of doing something that they completely love doing.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think like with platforms of like Drag Race or even Dragula is another drag TV show. If you haven't watched it, you should. It's on Netflix. Like those are maybe the only option of like being able to sustain yourself on drag, but there's so many other options. And I know plenty of people who are Boston local based who are completely supporting themselves on their drag careers, whether that's like taking commissions for other artists of like costume making and designing, or wig styling and creating and things like that, video editing. Sadly, a lot of those people lost most of their income, because performing is also like a big aspect of making your income and producing events and things like that. So yeah, I think there's definitely so many ways to support yourself with drag as an art form, performing, and all of the other things that I listed, and even more out there. For sure. Especially I think like now is providing more of like, there's a lot of more people watching and viewing. So if I was, performing at a club on a Tuesday night, maybe there'd be like 10 people in the audience, and now I get 250 viewers on Instagram. So there is, not to be like so cheerful about a really terrible situation, but there is some like positive aspects happening for the drag community, I think, as far as like performance-based stuff.
I think, yeah, I want to definitely lift up Kirby. You have also had like a really consistent online presence with really like peppy, fun drag, and I've really appreciated that. And there's other DJs and people who are making queer space available, either visually with images or like hosting online parties. Part of the art that I do obviously is gathering people in a room, and so that's not happening right now. But I'm also a writer and a potter, and my pottery studio closed because we can't gather together. And that's a way that I make money. That's a way that I take care of myself, that I feed my own spirit. So everything has gotten harder, frankly, since that studio closed. Like, it's harder to do my job. It's harder to think of things. It's harder to move my body. There's all sorts of things that making art gives to me that I now don't have access to. And I think Boston was starting to kind of get it together in terms of communal art making spaces. None of them are affordable, just to be clear, but there are a few more of them that exist. So I'm hopeful that that means that we're on the right track. And I know that the city was putting together a whole series of conversations of what artists in the city of Boston need in order to sustain themselves. I think that's amazing. For me, the two policy things that I would suggest for artists, one is cancel all student debt. It's got to go. It murders creativity of young people. We just have nothing left when we're working to pay off of our student debt, right? And the second thing is that we need to fund artists. And I think a really kind of nasty thing has developed in the city of Boston, that there's an extremely small amount of funding for a lot of creative people. And so making art has become this really hyper competitive and kind of cutthroat thing. And am I good enough? And making art is not about having the best product. I think if you really want to invest in artists, that means paying for people's time to be expansive and unencumbered and creative. And that doesn't look that cute in a results-oriented society that we live in, right? Like, three of us here work in the social work and mental health field. Everything is about what can you bill to insurance? What is the outcomes-based, evidence-based intervention that we can use? If we think of that way in terms of artists, we're going to get art, and we're going to get artists who are competing with each other instead of lifting each other up.
That's right. It's facts.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, this is it's exciting, but also disappointing because of the realities that we're living, but it's exciting because of the opportunity that we have to sort of lift up artists in our community and have a conversation about how are we actually looking at art in a way that is reflective of the people who are producing it and uplifting those voices. And like so many things that we've been talking about and continue to talk about have to do with problems that existed before this crisis, but now are felt even more strongly. I think an example that for that I've noticed is the intersectionality between gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, and race, which is not something that I personally experience. I'm a cisgendered white person, and I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to really delve deeper into that conversation about what are the problems that are going on right now, and how can we, as a city, as someone who works for the city, address it, but then also how as a community can we sort of uplift those voices. So I want to put that out there and hope that someone will be able to answer that. Big question.
Yeah, to me, just to answer the question really quickly, as queer people, as trans people, specifically as queer and trans people of color, we sit at the intersection. And I think that there has to be a space where we are intentional about the change that we need to see. And two, I believe, again, we need to lead from where the folks, those of us who sit at the epicenter of this, right? Because I'm hearing everyone, and like Sammy said, as Kirby said, we need to be funding artists. We need to be supporting artists, right? But on the flip side of that, for those of us that are artists of color, how much money can we access? Many of us don't even know the grants are out and the funding is available, and then we're trying to piece it together, and I think that it's going to require a level of intention, accountability, and strategy, right? Where we have to run an inside-outside game. I think about the ACT UP, how ACT UP started, right? With ACT UP, they had an outside game, they had an inside game, they had the girls who did the policy, they had the girls who did, the drag shows, who protested, all of that, but it required intention and strategy. And I think that until we get serious about the issue and until we get serious about how we're going to change the problem and what's going on, we're going to come right back to this point again, and it's going to be worse, right? A client of mine, at Common Square Health Center, and also work with the Department of Public Health, they're talking about the fact that for many people who are quarantining, after this is over, we're going to have a high number of people that have STIs that are impacted by HIV, right? But again, who are those people? Those people look like me. Those people look like Kamar, you know, and I think that until we get serious about it, it's going to be the same issue. So to just answer your question quickly, again, sitting at the intersection of these issues, we have to get a strategy. We have to get intention. We have to get a plan down that addresses these issues. No one should be hungry. No one should lack access to quality food, healthy food. No one should lack access to healthcare, especially in our state. And a number of people who are artists, who are upwardly mobile, who are not upwardly mobile, do not have access to healthcare and do not have access to adequate services. You know, and I think that's something that until, again, we get the action plan down and we get serious about this, we're going to keep coming back to this place. The next time it won't be COVID, it's going to be something else.
That is, oh, please go ahead.
I'm sorry. There are several different like pandemics that people of color face, especially the HIV. We have the HIV pandemic. We have the substance use pandemic that's out. And then we have COVID pandemic that is out as well. So these are very serious issues. And like, I agree. And, you know, like people, it's hard to live through this. It's hard to see your peers and others go through this and, you know, and just kind of sit and like talk about all the goodness of things that is going on. Like we actually need answers, and like we really do need answers now. And part of those answers are as starting things, groups like this, starting conversations like this, so people know what's going on. Because half of the time is that people don't know what's happening in the community, and like we need to share this information, and we need to let folks know what is really going on, and the intersections that are very severe, and the lives that are going to be at risk and taken because of these intersections that have not been addressed. So I just appreciate this call period because we're able to just, you know, delve into that a little bit and talk about it a little bit. But instead of just talking, we do need to mobilize. I agree. And we need to make things happen for our community and for others community that we are seeing like come like just going through all these pandemics that are not going to be coming out well out of them.
Yeah. And if I can just add really quickly as well, something that we also should talk about as a community, you know, we talk about housing, employment, mental health services, substance use, but explicitly, we have to talk about the crystal meth epidemic in our community and how that is, like, people are at home right now getting lit up, you know? And I think that until we start talking about why is there no services? A friend of mine had to go to the hospital after, I remember going to the hospital with him a couple weeks back, and at the hospital, doctor's like, well, there's no beds. We have nowhere to place him. And he had to go back home and use, right? We need to talk about the lack of programming. We need to talk about the lack of services, funding, research, data, you know, to really address these issues, because we are going to really gag when we get back on the other side of this, you know?
Oh, sorry. I will go to Councilor Breadon first and then Sammy.
The artist issue is something that we're thinking about in Alston. Before this whole pandemic hit us, we were in the process of trying to designate our Alston as an arts district. We'll pick that up when we get back to some sort of normalcy. But I really feel that in the interim, you know, just to have a just to let our visioning in our city for creating spaces for artists to thrive and grow and develop their strong. So I think, you know, to really put down a marker that says that our artist community is important, and that it is part of our economic in the city, and that it brings vitality and makes our
Did anyone else lose audio for the counselor?
Yeah, I think. Sorry, Councilor Breadon, we lost your audio there for a moment.
Did you lose me?
Just a little bit.
Okay.
Okay.
I was just talking about the artist community in Alston Brighton, and when this is all over, we have to try and get back to working on establishing that, and because so many folks are being displaced, it's like gentrification has been happening in Alston Brighton for long. So many of our immigrant neighbours and our artist community have been displaced, and it's just not affordable for ordinary folks to live here anymore. So we've a lot of work to do in that area. Did you hear me?
Yes, and I completely agree. And as an Alston resident, I appreciate everything that you're doing. It means quite a lot to me. I want to throw it over to Sammy, because you also had something to say.
I want to say one thing quickly to Amir's point about programming. A really easy thing that we need so much more of, or I say it's easy, needle exchange. It's so like, that's what I'll say about that. And I think in terms of the queer perspective of needle exchange, that has a lot to do with acceptability politics, and particularly white, affluent queers and LGBTQ people not wanting to have needle exchanges at their programs. And siloing that to the behind the scenes communities, which is Black and brown communities. And everybody is not served by that. So that's one thing. I also think in terms of racial justice, there's like a major racial justice lens to funding artists. When we look at the patterns of gentrification, it's artists who can't afford to live in the city moving into low income neighborhoods. And there's also queer patterning with gentrification in a major way. And that has to do with where people feel safe and where they can afford to live based on discrimination in terms of housing and income. So when we invest in ending discrimination and oppression against queer people, and when we invest in artists, we're also investing in trying to help stop gentrification and keep communities thriving and alive that have existed for generations in this city.
Jacob,
Yes,
Jacob,
Counselor. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I have to get off this call right now. I have something to deal with. I'm sorry I have to cut out, but I really appreciate the invitation to participate, and I hope we can do this again sometime soon.
Thank you, Counselor. I do hope for that as well, and I appreciate your advocacy on all these issues. So,
Very
waving
good.
goodbye to the
Thank
counselor.
you.
I'll represent for you, Liz. Don't worry, I'll represent.
I know. Bye.
Thank you.
Right.
Jacob, could I just jump in here really quick?
Mm-hmm.
About
I'm still here.
Good. You're not done yet. Sorry.
Go ahead, Counselor.
Okay. Let me be respectful of hogging the mic up in here. But you know what? So I've always led with knowing that despite how bad things are, there's always something good in it, right? And the fact that we're having this conversation during these times speaks, and because the conversation that we're having are conversations that we were having before it. Now, and I love the way Jacob talked about this being solution-based, is we know what we know. We already walked into this conversation already with a bag full of things that were not working beforehand. I would really love to walk out of this conversation with 3 things that we can commit to as a community to work on and build from, right? I know earlier we talked about convening people through doing a drag show in June. We talked about possibly doing a prom in May. And then for me, it's really about how do we see the intersection of all of our identities, whether we are part of the queer community or not. I believe this is really an opportunity for us to bring people in ways that help strengthen the work and the movement, so that everybody recognizes the role that we all play in it, right? And I think that that is really, for me, where my heart is leading towards, is like, how do we create this amazing opportunity right now with all of these amazing folks that are here in this conversation, and bring people into the fold, so that we can walk out with some clear action plans, action steps. I'm on the committee for arts and culture, right? So I have an opportunity in the space that I sit in to really move some conversations forward as it relates to arts and equity and LGBTQ, right? Like, that is what having access and opportunity, and it's how you utilize that space now to move. So let's identify some things, Jacob, in this dialogue that touches upon very specific aspects of the work, so that we have our marching orders. And whether it be through writing resolutions or introducing a public hearing, or doing some programming, let's use this time to build, which is what I hear Amir doing, this call to action. And I'm all for accountability, but I will say that accountability is 360, and it includes everybody in that process. It can't just be elected officials, because elected officials have this much power. The real power lies in the hands of the people who are living these realities every day, and who are doing the work, who are in the front lines, right? Like, that's the type of stuff that I'd like to, I don't want to get ahead of the agenda, Jacob, but I would really love to have this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be really helpful to start off. I know everyone sort of touched on what their job titles are, but I'd really love to give an opportunity just for everyone to stay with the resources that they have currently, get that out there so people know that, at least from the four of us who are not working in government, here are some places that they can go to get help, either online or any sort of resources. So I'd love to be able to give that opportunity just to plug all the work that you're doing as a start. So if anyone is interested in starting with that, that would be fantastic. I'll throw it off to Amir first to make it easy.
So again, I run A&I. We're a creative and visual design firm for social impact. A lot of my work is based around using strategy in the creative to for a call for action. So that could be content creation, that could be a campaign, that could be design solutions, and doing a lot of that work with clients both locally and across the country as well. For me, what I think, if I'm to respond to 3 action items, I think that one, there has to be a resolve around how do we lower the threshold for mental health services? So I'm thinking about, like, we have a 311 number. Is there a way that we can look at same thing, creating a number or something that people can easily remember, and lowering the threshold to ensure that they can access mental health services. So whether that be virtually, whether that be by phone, whether that be by text, whether that be group Zoom meetings, you know, where people can do that in group settings. I think that one, we have to create a space where we are lowering the threshold for mental health services and getting everyone access. That's the first thing. And also looking at that from the standpoint of like health access as well. Something else I think that we should definitely be prioritizing. If I can give a quick shout out to the Transgender Emergency Fund, which is led by Chastity Bowick. Something that they're doing is having low access to resources. So hotel vouchers, food vouchers, you know, transportation vouchers, access to mental health services, et cetera. And what's so important about that work is that they have access sites and low threshold availability to that. So you can call, you can email, there's the website, etc. You know, there's no hoops to jump through, etc. Chastity and her team are deploying services to folks immediately with no funding, with no support. You know, so I think that we have to start holding up the organizations doing the work and start to support that work. But I also think that there is a space to learn from those organizations that are doing the grassroots work of having neighborhood specific services for people. So that's something else I'm thinking about. So I definitely would say low threshold access to mental health services. I also would say a grassroots neighborhood specific approach to delivery of services. And the third thing I would say is there has to be a recovery package, right? What happened, when I say recovery package, outside of the money, right? Because we need the money. What happens with the folks that have to now get a new job? You know, with the onset of automation, who's teaching people coding, who's helping people grow their skills and making them prepared for the future. You know, a number of our LGBTQ seniors are at retirement age, but have no pension or social security or any of those things. How are we also supporting them in that way as well? So I definitely think that it's low threshold access to mental health and healthcare. I think it's we have to take a strategy approach of neighborhood grassroots approach of deploying services to people, period. No red tape, no jumping through the hoops, get people what they need with expedience. And then the next thing I think is we have to have a recovery package where people have access to grow their skills, people have access to learn about farming, like growing their own food, healthy food, cooking. I think those things are important. And like you said, Councilwoman, I do think that it's a 360, we have to take a 360 approach to it. You know, and I think that's why we have to look at it from the standpoint of what is it that I can do? What is it that Sammy can do? What is it that Kirby can do? And how do they all differ, right? But all also intertwine, you know, so those would be the three things that I'm thinking about. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I want to toss it over to Kirby because I haven't heard from you in a little while. A little bit about specifically the work that you're currently doing and what are three things that you want to see done as sort of a solutions-based conversation.
Just give me.
All right. In the meantime, oh, all right, you're good. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. If I can add one more thing. Just as a note, Councilwoman and Jacob, definitely let me know any way that I can be used in any way I can support. So definitely.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
Jacob, do you want me to come more from like drag perspective or like social worker perspective?
I mean, whatever you feel is the best way to have this conversation. I definitely want to hear a little bit of both, if you don't mind.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I think from like drag queer community perspective, I've just seen like a lot of people be really resilient and quick to action in our community for supporting each other because like larger, there's been a lot of gaps and holes in like larger government support for people who are like gig workers or performance-based workers. I know that they just put out like some kind of new unemployment, but a lot of people I know who depend on like gig work still won't qualify for that. So there's been a lot of like community-based fundraising and distribution of like, you know, any tips that I make or, you know, because I'm still employed, you know, those go to this community fund. So one that I want to highlight is was created by Richard Norden or DJ Char. He's like a local queer DJ, does a lot of events around the city. It's called the Boston Area Performer Support Fund. And if you're watching this on Facebook, you can go find it right now on Facebook. And if you need help accessing that, I don't know, you can contact me somehow. But so just to like see that, I would love to see more government support for like people who are falling through the cracks of like unemployment and especially like with health insurance for gig workers. is really important right now, and I haven't seen much support around that for folks. So yeah, I would love to see some more thought put into like the artist community and folks who are making their income via, you know, events and gig economy stuff. So where I've seen a lot of like resiliency and quick moves to action, it's just not going to be enough. I would love to see like, hey, if you don't need that $1,200 stimulus check, you know, find queer, Black, brown organization to donate it to. So yeah, I guess does that answer the
Totally.
question? Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Kamar, if you had any little bit of take some time to talk about Boston Glass and some solutions that you want to see implemented.
Yeah, so Boston Glass has it's a very low threshold, but we definitely have like the mental health capacity, behavioral health specialist, the families, they work with youth of color specifically, and we do a really great job, I think, at dealing with or having certain levels of care and certain levels of need specifically. Now, some of the things I want to talk about also, like that I think that would be helpful, I guess, during this time now, or things that we can do, is definitely grassroots and planning, and definitely making sure that we are, when we're making these plans and grassroots, we're spearheading like the communities that are really at risk. When we look at Dorchester and Roxbury and Mattapan and Hyde Park and all those places and like see all these numbers, we need to make sure that we have the science and the research and the data that, you know, backs our saying up in what we're going to do and how we're going to divest. I think that we really definitely need to work on that as well. And I think that we also just need, like to piggyback off of some of what Amir said, like how there are like lines people can call in that for suicide. Like we need to get people on the phones, like on phone banks. Like we need to bring back phone banks. We need to bring back like things that we can do where we are like planning this intentionally and like we are helping the solution, because it's going to be like on that other side when we come out of all this, like like everyone keeps saying, we are going to see like the print that it has left in our community, and it's going to be a very deep print. So yeah, those are my three things.
Thank you. Sammy, if you want to go next.
Sure. I wish that we were writing policy. I mean, I guess we kind of are. I guess that's the point of this community conversation. But there is so much brilliance in this room, virtual room. So that's one thing I'm thinking about. Yeah, this room. I think honestly, one of the biggest ones for me is loan forgiveness. I think if we can do that now, I think a lot of people's right now stress will decrease quite a bit. And I know that part of that is that, myself included, but also a lot of the circles that I run in, people went to school where they accrued debt in the first place. So I know that that's a piece of perspective. And I also know that there are people who have a lot more energy and talent and skill that they don't feel that they have the ability to share with our community right now because they're working to pay off debt. So those are two things that I'm thinking about. I'm also thinking about like mental health care. I think a lot of people, for really good reason, are skeptical of mental health care. I mean, why would somebody who's going through a really hard time pick up the phone and talk to a stranger that they've never met and who may be a totally different race or socioeconomic class from them? And also a lot of our mental health care system is run by white folks and serving Black and brown folks in the city. And there's just a huge race crisis in terms of our mental health care systems as a whole. So I think, but And I think what I would say to anybody listening to this right now is that there are incredibly kind and skilled people on the other end of that phone. That's just, it's just true. Like, I think all of us who work in this field know that the people by and large that we work with are deep and kind and thoughtful and present. So I'd love to work on some of that stigma. I mean, I can see like a really effective video of mental health care workers, even something as simple as standing in front of your Zoom and being like, I'm the person on the other end of the phone when you call. And like, what a difference that would make for people. And I think particularly if there was like information put out for queer people to access that mental health care and to say like, this is queer competent, or not even queer competent, just say like, are you queer? I'm queer. I'm also a mental health provider, etc. And I think also some more skill, well, oh my God, I have so many different ideas, but one of them that's on my mind right now, just since we're talking about mental health, I think because we have 3 clinicians on the call, is we have incredible programs in this city like Teach Next Year, Boston Teacher Residency, et cetera, that we fill up our schools with passionate educators who need help getting through their education in order to get their masters and teach in our schools. Why don't we have that for mental health clinicians? And it should be fully paid for by the city. There should be some sort of agreement the way that it is for teacher training programs, just as an example. I think also, yeah, I think maybe I will stop there for now. But I guess I would say also uplift the communities that we already know we're serving, who like queer folks who we already know are isolated, like teenagers, for example, and queer elders. We already have congregate meal sites for LGBTQ folks. And so like what's happening for those communities that have built themselves painstakingly over years to even eke out a part of the funding and like eke out a space within the system to have LGBTQ congregate meal sites for seniors, like that is hard work. And so what are we doing to celebrate and support those people now that they're living in isolation without food security?
Can I add something?
Of course.
I apologize. So first of all, can I just say that Sammy is on this call preaching right now. So shout out to Sammy. In just responding to what that you just said, I agree. Just like how we have, these different like corps that, they train people, deploy them to the community. We have to take that same approach to mental health, right? I think that for many organizations in our communities, right, many of the community health organizations, they're 3-4 months, backed up on being able to take in new patients, right? But we have BU, BC, Harvard, we have all of these schools with these clinicians who are right now sitting at home, right? And I think that there's an opportunity for us to start deploying those people to the community to be able to start supporting folks. And I think that, I like the idea of like a video, meet this person, this is who you're going to be talking to, or is it a way that we make it neighborhood specific? So if you live in Cobbin Square, you speak Haitian Creole, and you would like to have a clinician that is queer, that speaks Creole, there's an opportunity for that, and it's real intention and it's about action, right? And I think that we have to deploy a core of people that focus on mental health, access to healthcare, and breaking down those barriers, So that's my immediate thing I was thinking.
Yeah. Councilor, go ahead. Your 3 things.
Oh, no, I'm here to listen and learn. But
well, we need allies in this conversation too. So we want to make sure that we're
shut up. I'm here. I'll give you my 3 ideas too. I'm just joking. No, what I was gonna say is that for me, and it's really dangerous when I'm in spaces where there's creativity and brainstorming happening, because I am a doer, right? And I automatically just want to dive into it and build the infrastructure for that work to happen, right? So what I'm hearing is that, or I think there's some opportunities in the more immediate future, is to have an intergenerational panel discussion where we're really intentional about bringing some of our elders and some of our young people who are dealing with these realities right now, to unpack this conversation alongside our elders and youth, right? Because right now we're in the middle. We need some more elders and we need some more youth to round this conversation. Not to say that y'all not young, but I'm just saying some younger folks and some older folks. Okay, so just be mindful of that. So I'd love to be able to have an intergenerational conversation with clinicians who are LGBTQ identified, right? Who are helping to have this conversation alongside this intergenerational, right? So very similar to how we're doing it with the youth and the clinicians of color. I'd love to be able to do a hybrid of that here for LGBTQ clinicians and an intergenerational dialogue. Okay, so that's one thing that I think is an immediate community conversation that we can help convene and co-host. But what I'd love to do is that I like to put people to work. So that requires y'all coming to us with some ideas of who are the people that should be on that panel and who are the clinicians that we should include in that conversation to help us, produce it, if you will, right? So that's one very specific thing that our office can help convene, because we're conveners, right? That's what we do. We're really good at bringing people in. So that's one thing, Jacob, that we can definitely do in terms of action planning. The other piece of what I'm hearing that is just equally as important is to really look at the intersection of art and equity within the LGBTQ community in particular. And that's not just around access to grants and housing, but also procurement of businesses and opportunities that are coming out of the city of Boston, right? To have a get real conversation around the intersection of this, right? I think if we are gonna host our digital drag, which Kirby, you are already the curator of such a world, I really think that we should delve into that. And the way that we go about planning it brings in young people into the process of planning it so that they're learning alongside you about what that looks like. Because I'm thinking about building career explorations for young people. And so if there's a way for us to build this in a way that they're learning, they're not just here to perform and be spectators, but that they're here to help with that process. If there is an opportunity for that to happen, I'd love to be able to look at this as a workforce development project, if you will, to help expose young people to viable careers and elders too, to the work, to this as a viable work. I know in the time of coronavirus, we can't convene and it might be harder, but if we can create a space for people to figure out how they could do this digitally and make a living out of this new norm, then those are skills that they can use once we go out into the quote unquote real world, right? So just something to think about in terms of, because I'm the chair of small business and all things that deal with economic development. And I'm also a member of the arts committee. So these things fall within my purview. And so whatever that I can do to help drive that, I'd love to be a part of, right? So, and then the last piece is, I think, in terms of the student debt piece, I want to be really clear, like, and manage expectations that is something that on the federal level, I know Ayana has been doing a lot of work on. And then I know on the state level, there's debt-free advocacy happening. One of our, the director of constituent services for our office ran this campaign, zero debt free for students so that we can erase debt. So I'll involve Sis now in this conversation because she might have some conversation to share with you, Sammy, specifically around that area. But I do know that when people are financially stressed, that impacts our mental and social and emotional well-being. And so I think that how do we tackle the financial aspects of the coronavirus impact. Not just for folks who are unemployed right now, but like, people who are going to engage in high risk behavior as a result of just their survival. We need to have that conversation. That is a real conversation to be had, and one that I have not heard until today, in terms of the high rates of STIs and and the HIV impact and all of that has not been engaged. That conversation has not come up in any of the circles that I've been in. And this is why we host these conversations, because they always inform our thinking. The fact of the matter is that we also, from a public health perspective, need to talk about the high risk behavior that people are engaging in just to survive. So I really do appreciate that being uplifted here, Jacob, and it's something that we're going to be, I'm looking at you, Jacob, just so you know, that's something else that I want us as an office to really start amplifying. So those are the sort of things that just kind of from hearing everyone, where I think some of the energy can go in. I'd love to hear from you, Jacob, as well, and what you're thinking about how all of this is landing. And I think Liz came back, and I'm not sure if she's back or if she knows she's here, but I see her phone.
I'm here.
Okay,
I don't know what to do with it though.
Yeah,
I'm back.
Oh, sorry, Councilor, please go ahead. If you wanted to, we're talking about 3 solutions that we would like to see implemented to address some of the concerns that we brought up during this meeting.
Well, one of my big issues is the housing situation. I feel that, I just feel that the housing, there's so much development going on in our neighborhood here in Alston Brighton that, and it's priced at it's more towards the luxury end, and it doesn't equate with the earning capacity of the people who actually live here. So, I'm going to circle back and go back to talk about all that COVID, but it'll be a different world when post-COVID. It's going to be a very different scenario than we were in even 3 months ago. So we'll see what happens. I think generational, I'm excited to conversation about intergenerational work, not only in the LGBT community, but in the broader community. I think we're stronger together. It's sort of a cliche at this point in time, but I really do feel that for the health and resilience of our communities would be really connections and living, and that includes thinking about housing and all of it. The other big issue for me as a healthcare professional is to really, and it's not really a local issue that we have a lot of power over, but COVID crisis is exposing the weaknesses in our for-profit or healthcare system. It's equity we don't have equity in our system. There's so many gaps. It's very expensive. Our outcomes are no better than other Western developed countries who spend much less on their healthcare. So, I think there's a bigger conversation to be had around single payer healthcare. Take the middleman out of it and make it more focused on delivery of good quality care for everybody. And that's my spiel for now. No small thing.
Absolutely. I know for me, before we kind of head into our last little segment, because we're almost out of time, for me, I think the biggest issue right now is data, or the lack thereof. One of the things that I've come into contact with is, we hardly even know the scope of the problem right now. And policy is my love language, to quote our fabulous Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. And the way I try to communicate what's going on is through policy data points, information, and there's so much that we're missing. The city of Boston doesn't currently have a classification for LGBTQ business enterprises. So knowing how to impact small businesses is super important, and it's something that we're missing right now. And then the other thing that I think is so important is leading with strengths. I think so often I have the tendency personally to talk about the crisis or the epidemic, and I don't feel in crisis. I feel on many levels of government underserved and unheard, and leading with the strengths that we have as a community and leading with our resilience is, I think, the best way to go through with this conversation. So we have a few minutes left before we wrap up, and I wanted to go around one more time for everyone. We have a lot of people listening to this conversation who are allies, and I would love for everyone to give one note that they would want allies to know, or an action item leaving this conversation, so that we can sort of empower the broader network of support that we have. So I want to start with Brady, because he's been very patient in listening to this entire thing and doing a great job moderating and keeping the flow and checking for internet comments and everything. So I want to start with you.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. I want to say, like, as like the youngest person on this call, I feel really blessed I got the opportunity to listen and hear everyone's experience and really have the opportunity to sort of like take that all in. So this has been a really cool experience for me. What I would say, like, if I could like speak to the LGBTQ plus allies of the world, what I would say to them is that I would really want them to recognize, when it comes to being an ally of the queer community, to recognize how our community intersects with everything that is currently going on, that was going on before and being exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis. When you talk about being a queer ally, that means that you're committing to racial justice. You're committing to equity you're committing to gender equity. You're committing to fighting class inequality and committing to economic justice. You know, it's not just about showing up at Pride or anything. It's really about, getting in and doing the work alongside the community and lifting up the community in all of these spaces, because from housing to healthcare to labor and workforce development, we're really on the front lines of all of these things that have only just been hit harder and harder because of the COVID-19 crisis. So I would really ask allies to just be aware of that and to really like take that in when they're working with our community.
Thank you. Kirby, one quick thing that you want all the allies out there listening to know.
I have to follow Brady's beautiful statement there. Okay.
Oh.
I was just thinking a lot about like intersectionality, and like just please keep in mind that like the intersection of like race and gender and socioeconomic status, like that's really impacting like the queer community, and just keep that in mind.
Sammy.
I think what I want everyone to know is that queer people are awesome. And so like, look at queer art, follow queer designers, buy queer art. If you have money, buy queer art, celebrate local art spaces, donate to performers, keep the hard-earned queer underground alive and well and supported financially and emotionally.
Thank you so much. Amir, one thing that you want allies to know.
And I everything that the three speakers before me said, but I would definitely want to add that we need our allies to make a commitment to access as equity. Number one, we have to get health access and eliminate red tape. And many of our allies are the folks that are running these organizations, right? So from an organizational standpoint, from your program standpoint, how are you ensuring that there's there's extreme low threshold to access care and accessing services? I know you said one thing. My other thing is there has to be a commitment to rent control. Luxury apartments, gentrification, all those things, we're gonna be on the street. It gotta go. So there has to be a commitment to rent control. I don't know what we have to do collectively to really get to that point, but to hear the mayor say that we want to look at opening up and start doing more construction again, none of us are going to be able to afford that. What's the point of any of that, right? So we definitely need to make a commitment to rent control, make a commitment to access as equity, and looking at mental health services, looking at healthcare and care services. That commitment, I think, is necessary.
Thank you. Kamar, one point that you want allies or anyone to walk away with?
So I agree with all the points that were made. And one point I want to go back to is just the allies understanding that this is our like, as far as queer people, and as far as like how many like we're talking about intergenerational like all kinds of people from intergenerationals and all type of people from all kinds of backgrounds. It's understanding allies understanding that they have a part in that as well. And I for people to understand that these different queer people from all types of backgrounds, and some of those backgrounds have to do with your very own. So just taking ownership and understanding. Hold on, my internet. Just taking ownership and understanding that those backgrounds are very important, and that even though you did not think it directly, it directly affects all of us. We are all together in this, and so just take it like that. That would be what I would say.
Thank you. I want to throw it over to Councilor Breadon. One note that you want allies to know about this conversation.
For allies, I feel that I agree with one of the other panelists about the intersectionality. You know, it has to be a tide that lifts all the boats. So to pick, just to focus on LGBT and support LGBT issues, it's broader than that and deeper than that, and that we have to lift all the boats and address the economic injustice, environmental injustice, the whole range of issues that are challenging now in this moment. We're in this together. So just come on board and let's get this boat moving, so to speak.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then Councilor Mejia, as an ally, what is something that you've learned or something that you want other allies to know?
Yes, thank you, Jacob, for organizing this and facilitating. I have been a lifelong ally, right? I don't even know if that title even fits me. I feel like I am part of the community. But I think that it's important for people who are not part of the community recognize that they are part of the community. Being an ally it's more than just showing up. It's really about speaking up. Even when it feels uncomfortable to do so, right? So I think allyship goes just beyond just the check the box. I have a friend, I invite them to dinner. Like, I think allyship requires you rolling up your sleeves and living it, whether you are in front of it or not, right? It's about just owning it 24/7. I think that that's really important for allyship. And I have to agree with what my colleagues have said here in this space, that, it's about the intersection of all of our lives. And if we continue to work in silos and that everybody's here is just fighting for their own battle, we're all gonna just be fighting each other. And I think that if we can all really recognize how we're all in the same struggle, no matter what piece of the pie we're going to be sliced up in, that we recognize that we're all in this together. And so that has to be a commitment for us to recognize that. So thank you.
And thank you, Councilor. I want to give you the final word, but one thing I just wanted to say before we wrap up is, so I first came out in December of 2017. I'm relatively new to understanding more about who I am as an individual. So much of what I've been learning is actually unlearning, and really letting go of some of the tendencies, some of the tropes that I internalized in the past, and becoming a better person. And one of the things that I have learned is just how the breadth of warmth and community and love that exists in the queer community and is spread outward. So I just want to say how grateful I am for everyone coming, speaking their truth, living who they are with so much passion and integrity. It's something that I am still in the process of emulating. And I see you all as role models and community leaders. And I can't thank you enough for everything that you're doing and continue to do. It means so much to me. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to acknowledge one thing that we did, and I know Liz, we can't see you, we can hear you, but I wish I could see you so you could see.
I see you though.
Okay, you could. Okay. Even though you can't, you could still see. Okay, because sometimes people are on their phones and they can't see anything either. But listen, one thing that we did not acknowledge, and when I really want to uplift, is that Liz, Councilor Breedon, is the first woman out lesbian in the city council in the history. Okay, the first, and that speaks volumes, right, to how far we have come. But we also should recognize that the fact that we've been in existence for so long, that she's the first, let's hope to God that she will not be the last, right?
Absolutely.
And it's about building that pipeline. So I just wanted to thank you, Councilor Breadon, for participating in this dialogue and for being a true sister with me in the fight for equity and in the work that we do. I'm really grateful that we both won and that we're both immigrants and doing this work collaboratively. So I just wanted to uplift you, and I'm glad that you are here with us today having this conversation. So thank you for joining us this evening, and the same to echo Jacob's sentiments. I am so grateful to each and every one of you for participating in this conversation and recognizing how important it is to have it, but not just to have it, but to really think strategically about what it is that we're going to do about it. Right? And so really having an action-oriented, solution-based dialogue so that we can all move the work forward. And so that is what our mandate is, to do this work. And so we are here to do just that. And so thank you for your wisdom, your creativity, your enthusiasm, and your realness. And I do appreciate the whole accountability piece, because you all elected us to serve you. And we're here to learn and work alongside you so that we can make sure that everybody moves up and out. So thank you. Thank you, Jacob, for allowing me to have the last word, because I was going to have it anyways. I'm just
I did know that.
But Liz, I don't want to have the last word, Liz. I want you to close us out.
Really?
Yes, I do.
Well, thank you so much for the invite to participate. I'd love to do this again sometime. There's a lot to talk about. I'm honored to have you as a colleague on the City Council, Sisters in Service. We're in a moment in time where everything has been shaken up, and we can't go back. We have to go forward, and we have to make the future a better, more equitable, more just future for everyone. So I'm really glad to have my shoulder to the wheel with you, Julia.
Well, all of us.
So yes. Thank you so much. Love you.
Thank you. Love you too. Bye, you guys. So we got next steps. Jacob will follow up with everyone in terms of what the next action items are. But I think we have our marching orders, and we have some really good ideas that came out of this conversation. All right.
Thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.